My name is Dynda Thomas. I'm a partner with Squire Patton Boggs, and I've been working with companies for a couple of years on conflict minerals compliance programs and efforts to understand supply chain, gather information about their supply chain, both for purposes of complying with the conflict minerals rule, but also to understand better about the contents of their products, what goes into their products, and where those contents come from. For many years, there's been significant trouble and civil war in the region of the Congo in Central Africa. And the armed militia, armed groups have used natural resources that are extracted from that region to make money and to use that money to perpetrate the horrible human rights violations and to continue the civil war. Millions of people have died. And people are very frustrated that governance and governments in general and central governments in Africa haven't been able to deal with this issue and haven't been able to keep people safe. So the U.S. Congress said, we're going to try to impose a rule and require U.S. companies to take certain action that we think is going to make a difference. We think it's going to reduce the ability of these armed groups to use the finances from mining these tin, tantalum, tungsten, and gold to make money to buy guns and to continue on with the Civil War. So the U.S. Congress passed a law. It's part of Dodd-Frank, previously little known portion of Dodd-Frank. And it said it required the SEC to pass a rule and impose a requirement on U.S. companies to report their use of conflict minerals. This is definitely a new sort of requirement for the SEC. The SEC previously has always cared about financial issues and governance issues for reporting companies. This is a new requirement, and so it's been very difficult for companies to get their arms around to understand exactly what they have to do and what the meaning of it is.
My name is Doug Heileman. I'm president of my own consultancy. I've been working on conflict minerals for about 4 years now, since the rule was first proposed. I submitted comments on the draft rule, which are referenced in the final rule. I've been helping companies develop conflict minerals programs, and I'm one of only 4 people who have conducted an independent private sector audit under the terms of the SEC rule. The Dodd-Frank conflict minerals rule is a very interesting animal in that, in my view, it's the very first time that a social issue has led to an SEC or an accounting rule. The proponents of including social, environmental, and other non-financial information in financial filings have been after this for a long time. And if you look in financial filings, you will find some references to environmental, climate change, and other issues, but those tend to cover rules that are already there. They just happen to apply to those issues. This is really the first instance where a social or non-financial rule, in my view, has led to an SEC rule.
3TG are everywhere. They're in cell phones. That's a great example. Almost everyone in the room will have one and look at it. It's the tungsten that makes it vibrate. It's the tantalum that holds the electric charge in the battery. Tin is used as solder in the circuitry, and gold is also used in the circuit board circuitry. Automobiles, airplanes, fashion. If you have a zipper in an article of clothing, there's tin in that. So the SEC issues a rule that requires companies, SEC reporting companies, who are manufacturers of products or contract with others to manufacture products for them. If those products contain conflict minerals, tin, tantalum, tungsten, or gold, and those minerals are necessary to the functionality or the production of that product, then those items are covered by the rule. So that requires reporting companies to know and understand the source and chain of custody of the conflict minerals in their products. Well, the only way for companies to do that is to reach back to their supply chain and ask their suppliers, tell me everything you can about the source and chain of custody of the conflict minerals in our products. So it's a many-layer process. It involves a reporting company turning to its direct suppliers and asking questions about the sourcing. Then requiring those suppliers to in turn ask their suppliers the same set of questions, all the way down until you get to the smelter or refiner of those minerals. One of the really important things for companies to realize is that this rule applies to SEC reporting companies. They're the ones that have to file reports with the SEC. But it also applies to non-reporting companies in the sense that they are in the supply chain of an SEC reporting company.
One provision about the rule is that the SEC realized that there was very little in the way of ways to collect information that could be useful, so the rule provided for 2 transition years, 2013 and 2014. And in 2015, it's expected that companies' programs will be fairly well developed. And another aspect of the rule will kick in, and that's an aspect that will require an independent private sector audit for the SEC filers who have found that they source any 3TG from the covered countries. So this audit is coming. The objectives are specified in the rule. They're pretty simple. They both relate to process. The audit objectives are not a guarantee. They're not focused on any particular product. They can be done by a CPA or a non-CPA according to standards. In the 2013 calendar year, there were only 4 companies that got to that point and elected to have the independent private sector audit. In 2014, it remains to be seen how many companies will do that. Probably not a lot more. But in 2015, I think people will start to look for that independent private sector audit, and we should see them out there in the hundreds. So even for companies who are still trying to figure out their program, I would encourage people to pay attention to what the objectives of that audit are and some of the other guidance out there from professional organizations on how to get ready for that audit.
Non-compliance with this rule is a little bit different than you might think of in other situations. One way a company could not comply with the rule is to simply not do a filing. Most companies don't take that approach. Most companies are eager to comply with the SEC requirements. They read up on what they need to do. They undertake good efforts and in good faith attempt to do that. That's really the way to not comply with the rule, or to make a company could make a filing that is utterly inadequate. But it's not a non-compliance with the rule to report your use and source of chain and custody of the conflict minerals. So it's not a lack of compliance to say that you obtain your conflict minerals from the Congo and that they benefit armed groups. There's nothing wrong with making that kind of statement. Companies don't want to make that statement because they don't want that to be the case. Nobody wants to be benefiting armed groups with their trade of conflict minerals. But the rule simply calls for disclosure. It doesn't call for using some set of suppliers and not using another set. It simply asks for disclosure.